guys, I'm here to talk about this book, Caddie Woodlawn. So my kids and I read it and we were obsessed, to say the least. This is really well written. If you're a fan of Little House on the Prairie or just what it was like growing up in the Wisconsin frontier in the 1860s, you will love this book. I loved it. And I was shocked to find it was based on truth. This is written by Caddie Woodlawn. Her real name is Caddie Woodhouse. Her granddaughter, Carol Ryrie Brink. So I got on Ancestry because I was like, this is based on a true story. And I wanted to find out two things. One, what kind of happened to Caddie after she grew up, after the books? And number two, who was the lord that they descended from in England? So I wanted to find if I could find out any information. So Caddie's grandfather was Thomas Dixon Woodhouse, and that was her father's father. So Thomas had John, which was Caddie's father. So Thomas Dixon Woodhouse is the son who was disinherited for marrying somebody who wasn't deemed high enough. And he married Mary Viapond. I saw this on Ancestry. And after his death, Mary remarried to Joseph Cradshaw. So Thomas Dixon Woodhouse, the person who married Mary Viapond, who had John, Caddie's father, had 5 siblings: Agnes, Betty, Mary, Margaret, and John. And John was the older brother, the one who would have inherited the estate. And Thomas Dixon Woodhouse, Caddie's grandfather, his parents were named John Woodhouse, and they spelled it Woodhouse. And he was born in 1755 and died in 1826. And he married Margaret Peggy Bowick. She was born in 1750. And Margaret Peggy Bowick is the one who had Thomas, John, Margaret, Mary, Betty, and Agnes. And I couldn't find anything before this, like John Woodhouse and Margaret Peggy Bowick. I couldn't find anything about them being lords, or what property they owned, or what happened, or who their property went to, or anything about that at all. So that's all I could find on Ancestry about them. I do see that John, which was Caddie's father, John's father was Thomas Dixon Woodhouse, as I already said, and Thomas Dixon and Mary Viapond had another child. John had a sister named Sarah, and that's all I could find was her name on Ancestry. I did see that John Woodhouse, his father was William Woodhouse. That's as far back as it goes. So William Woodhouse had John Woodhouse, who married Margaret Peggy Borwick, who had Agnes, Betty, Mary, John, Thomas, and Margaret. And then John had Thomas Dixon Woodhouse. The Woodhouse was changing to Woodhouse, who had John, who was Caddie's father. And that is as much as I could find out about her genealogy using Ancestry and Googling all these different things. I do want to do more research into their Lord Woodhouse and all of that stuff to see if it is true or if it was just something that she made up, because she says some of the book is not based completely on truth. Some of it was just little bits were changed, and I don't know if that's one of the things that was changed or not. That's a big part of the story. So now I'll get into what happened to Caddie when she grew up. So Caddie Woodlawn married at 19, a doctor, and she had a lot of children, but many of them sadly did not make it past 1 or 2 years, and this was soul crushing to me. It was really soul crushing because, as you know, I've had 7 miscarriages, and that has been very hard. And so at 20, after she was married, Caddie got married in 1853. Oh, I'm sorry, that's when she was born, I think. She was born in 1853. So at 20, she had her first child, Hattie May, and Hattie was born in 1873 and died in 1874. Then she had her second child, Henrietta. So Henrietta was born in 1875, and she died by suicide many years later. Henrietta was the daughter who had Caroline Ryrie, so who wrote Caddie Woodlawn. So Henrietta is the mom of the author of Caddie Woodlawn. So then in 1876, Caddie Woodlawn had a daughter named Caroline. And I couldn't really find much about this daughter, if she lived or died. I think she lived. Then she had in 1878 a daughter named Minnie, who died in 1879. So she either lived, for about a year. Then she had a baby at Frank in 1879. So the year that Minnie died, she had Frank, who died in 1881. So he was 2. And when Caddie had Frank, she was 26 years old. Then she had, in 1883, so 2 years after Frank's death, a baby who was unnamed, who died in 1884. This is just, it's so sad that her babies didn't make it. Then she had a baby named Alan when she was 32. And he was born in 1885, and he lived until 1888. So he was almost 3 when he passed away. What is happening to her babies? Then she had her very last daughter, Winifred, who Caddie was 39 when she had Winifred. And Winifred was born in 1892. So she had her first baby in 1873 and her last baby in 1892. I had my last baby last year when I was 37. 2 years ago now. She's almost 2. So, like, I understand what it's like. So Winifred is there with Caddie when Caroline moves in from Henrietta's house. So Winifred was 9 when her father died. Isn't that awful? Caddie's husband died when Winifred was 9. And Winifred was 12 when Henrietta committed suicide and Caroline had to move in with her with Caddie Woodlawn. And she talks about her auntie in here in the author's note, which I will read at the end of this video. This is just setting it up. So I saw on Ancestry that for some reason Winifred was married when she was 13, and I screenshot the marriage certificate. So Winifred was married, but on there she wrote that she was almost 16. So I'm wondering if her father died when she was 9, and then her older sister died by suicide when she was 12, and her and then Carol Ryrie moves in with Caddie. So this had to be probably a very tumultuous time, and to be the last baby of 8 and to have 5 of her siblings die, Caddie Woodlawn herself probably had a hard time emotionally attaching herself to Winifred because she was thinking Winifred was going to die. I know what that's like from my miscarriages. I have a really hard time celebrating the life of my pregnancy and just thinking that my baby is probably going to die. Whew. Yeah. In 1901, when Winifred is 9 and Caddie herself is 48, was when her husband died. And it was 1904 when her daughter Henrietta died and her granddaughter came to live, and Caddie would have been 51. So I've got my notes here. So that's what happened to Caddie Woodlawn. But she says that even though she had some sad times in here, that she was very happy. And now I'm going to read the author's note. I'm going to read some of it. Let's see. Caddie Woodlawn was my grandmother. Her real name was Caddie Woodhouse. All the names in the books except one are changed a bit. The name she didn't change was Robert Ireton. There is a strong bond of love between my grandmother and me. As soon as I could walk, I used to run away to see her. She was fun to be with, and she always had something interesting to tell me. By the time I was 8, I had lost both of my parents, and I went to live with my grandmother and an unmarried aunt. So the unmarried aunt would have been Winifred, who was 12. So I had no brothers or sisters. Gram and Aunt Winifred, it just says aunt in here, but we know which aunt it is, and I were the family, and we lived in northern Idaho in an old-fashioned house in a big town lot. The storytelling came naturally because Gram and Aunt had told me so many stories. And then I particularly loved to hear about Gram's pioneer childhood in Wisconsin. Being an only child made me want especially to hear about her many brothers and sisters who lived together in such good nature and love. The only one of them that Carol ever saw, she says in here, was Hetty. She knew her as Great Aunt Et, and I used to look forward to her visits with us. Then the stories flew thick and fast, and I sat spellbound, listening. There's a sequel to Caddie Woodlawn called Magical Melons, and Hetty is more of a main character in that, and I think that she based that book more off of Hetty's stories. It is many years later that I remember these stories of Caddie's childhood, and I said to myself, if I loved them so much, perhaps other children would like them too. Caddie was still alive when I was writing, and I sent many letters to her asking about the details that I did not remember clearly. She was pleased when the book was done. There's only one thing I do not understand, she said. You never knew my mother and father and my brothers. How could you write about them exactly as they were? But Graham, I said, you told me. And after the book was published, school children used to come to see her on her birthday and sing for her or give her little presents. This pleased her very much. She lived to be almost 86 years of age. Like a true pioneer, she had come all across the country, from Boston to Wisconsin to Idaho to the Pacific Ocean. She had many troubles in her life, but she always looked out cheerfully at the world and found it a good place. She noticed people and interesting things that happened to them, and she found these things worth retelling. For myself and my two younger cousins, Graham represented kindness and good sense, justice tempered by humor, and love and security. I wonder if the two younger cousins were Winifred's children. After her death, we had a line from the Bible carved on her gravestone. Her candle goeth not out by night. The candle goeth not out by night reminds me of that book, A Lantern in Her Hand. I wonder if Carol Ryrie had ever read that. She wrote that on February 6, 1973. So yeah, I would love to know if you guys know anything else about Caddie Woodlawn, and I will make an updated video if I do find out anything else about her history in Europe from Lord Woodhouse. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this book as much as I.